Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Allen. We all recall those horrible events of 9/11 which spawned the war in Afghanistan. 20 years ago, Canadian armed forces stepped foot onto that land, which would see 40,000 Canadians serve as part of a NATO mission from 2001 to 2014. And with any mission comes the risk of death. A total of 159 Canadian Forces personnel died in that mission. And now, 7 years after Canada's formal withdrawal, the U.S. has finally completed its withdrawal, leaving Afghanistan, sadly, almost right back to where it started, under control of the Taliban. For the past several weeks, many of us around the world have been left horrified with the scenes and reports coming out of Afghanistan. We are quickly shocked at how quickly the country fell to the Taliban. We are stunned at how sloppy the withdrawal has been. Many local interpreters who had been guaranteed visas and safe passage to the US and Canada are still stuck on the ground in hiding, fearing for their lives. And we're saddened at the thought that all the gains in democracy and human rights over the past 2 decades seem to have been wiped out in just a few weeks. There have been several media reports of forced marriages of girls as young as 12, raping, public hangings, and door-to-door searches and execution of local US allies. So what will become of the Afghan people under the Taliban rule? What has Canada's response been? Is it good enough? Later in the program, we will hear from Dr. Nipa Banerjee, Senior Fellow with the School of International Development and Centre for International Policy Studies at the University of Ottawa, and was the resident head of Canada's aid program in Kabul, Afghanistan from 2003 and 2006. But now we are joined by Adam Korzeniewski, a combat veteran with the United States Marine Corps who served in Afghanistan and a former member of the Trump administration in the Treasury Department and the Commerce Department. Welcome, Adam. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Sorry we had to have you on with, in my opinion, such a negative state of affairs. So why don't we start with that? Please share with us, what are the state of affairs in Afghanistan right now?
Absolutely. So as of yesterday, or sometime in the evening, Eastern Seaboard time, the United States had officially completely pulled out of Afghanistan with its last 3 flights of C-17 super transport aircraft. There's actually quite a few photos of one of the most senior-ranking American military officials actually boarding the airplane last, if you go onto social media.
Right. Yes, I did see those images. And again, I think this sort of caught Canada off guard because we did pull out several years ago, and now Afghanistan has sort of just erupted into this chaos. So to help our viewers, why did the U.S. pull out and why now?
So, there's been a large question of whether, this has been a productive exercise of American power. So, there's this thing called sunk cost fallacy, whether we're spinning our wheels or not in Afghanistan and trying to expect something different to happen. And practically speaking, America is tired of these endless wars that it's been fighting in the Middle East, with seemingly more and more complicated justifications for their continuance, especially as the United States reorients itself towards Pacific theater. It's becoming more and more incumbent upon American policymakers to pull out of Central Asia.
So was it always anticipated that the Taliban would take over? Again, I felt like I was caught off guard this summer. So when the reports started emerging, I was like, my gosh, the Taliban are back. Was this always an anticipated event? And did we expect this to happen so quickly?
So there's a lot of different opinions on this. For anybody who is on the ground, especially in a place as rural as I was in Afghanistan, called Helmand Province, anybody would be able to tell you that both the Afghan government was kind of a house of cards and that the Taliban would probably take over pretty quickly. The United States State Department published this assessment that they expect the Afghan government to at least exist for 90 days after the United States pulled out. It only lasted for 11 days. So it was kind of a farce, and that's what happens. Basically what we did was we put in a bunch of university professors to run a country that's only held together by the force of arms. And then, there's a lot of different opinions on this, especially once you start getting into the NGO humanitarian side of things. But, this is the kind of just a return to history, right? the world is not flat, and that people's cultural norms do matter. And what we're seeing is, like you said earlier, Afghanistan's reverting back to how it was before American involvement.
Well, we're going to cut to a commercial break in just a few moments, and afterwards I'd like to talk about what this means for the world, for America, and most especially for the Afghan on the ground. Welcome back. We're discussing the state of affairs in Afghanistan, and we've all seen those horrible images. And joining me is Adam Korzeniewski, a combat veteran of the United States Marine Corps and a former member of the Trump administration. Adam, thank you again for joining me to shed some American light, if you will, on what's going on. Before the break, we were discussing how you suggested that the Afghan government was really a house of cards. It was going to fall. It was being propped up, I think you used the word academics, by academics running the country where arms kind of spoke. The US, Canada, NATO, I mean, billions and billions was spent to train, to equip the Afghan army, to train with NGOs on democratic political measures, because that is what we understood that Afghan people wanted. Where is all that training now?
So, in terms of the military side of it, some of it clearly went to the Taliban, as you're seeing with videos of the Taliban flying helicopters now around Afghanistan. Some of it went to now the rebellious factions in Afghanistan that are opposing the Taliban. A lot of it just kind of disappeared into the dust, right? And this is the big thing that you have to stop thinking like a Westerner once you go abroad for the most part, but specifically, especially in Afghanistan, they're barely, like, people are barely getting by there. Child mortality rate's very, very high there. And so when you're not addressing fundamental issues to their way of life, their ability to have a life,
right.
You're actually just spinning your wheels. Like, we didn't really do the basics. Like, they don't care about democracy. They don't necessarily even have a word for it in Pashtun. Like, it's a foreign concept. But what they do know is when, like, their family member dies because of smoke inhalation because of a fire in their house, while they're cooking.
Right. So would it be appropriate to suggest then this was just way over everybody's head? This was an impossible task?
Yeah. So people started taking their very extremely liberal, extremely westernized opinions and trying to implement them on a place that doesn't care, because it's more interested. It's more in the subsistence type of lifestyle. Okay,
you mentioned that, because I was speaking more like theoretically on the concept of democracy, but you mentioned that now various arms, et cetera, have fallen into the hands of the Taliban, which I'm sure is the exact opposite that people would have wanted. But let me go through some numbers here. So again, the US has left behind a stockpile of equipment, according to the New York Post, that includes 600,000 assault rifles, some 2,000 armored vehicles, 40 aircraft, including Black Hawks. Afghanistan has gone from the 93rd strongest air force in the world, basically last, to 26th. Why was all this equipment left there? Can you square that for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So we left it there for the Afghan army to use against the Taliban. And the Afghan army just crumbled. There's a member of the British Parliament had this very long speech about the fact that he served and fought with the Afghans. And the problem is, like, he has this very rose-tinted image of this. A lot of people have this idea that the Afghan army was this honorable, glorious thing. And there was units in the Afghan army who fought well, who still continue fighting to this day. But for the most part, most of them just crumbled when the Taliban pressured it. In terms of in terms of my personal interests, like, this is me speaking, not the United States speaking. I'm more concerned about the United States leaving all those dogs behind than any of the weapons there. The weapons are going to crumble and collapse under the extreme attritional environment there. It takes a lot of infrastructure to maintain these heavy wheeled vehicles and the aircraft.
Okay, well, that offers me some comfort knowing that all this high-tech equipment will only maybe be utilized in a very short period of time. Because, but I have heard reports, and I've read this in the news, that they might not just the weapons, but really it's the Black Hawks we're talking about. They may be sold in deals to the Chinese or the Russians.
So, like, these are like 1980s tier Black Hawks. The Chinese and Russians already have them. In fact, I can't remember the name of it. Basically, there's a name for it, but it's nicknamed in Chinese the copy Black Hawk or the copy Hawk. And it's basically like their main Chinese transport helicopter, their light transport helicopter, looks almost identical to the U.S. version because it's like such a ubiquitous design.
Okay, we only have 30 seconds left, so I've got to cut to the big question, which is, how's this going to impact President Biden and his legacy, if anything?
It's going to be a black mark on his legacy, and it's going to create more pressures internationally on him. A lot of countries are taking notice of what's going on, and they sense weakness.
My goodness. Well, it was good to have you on. We're going to have you on again because things just keep changing there in Afghanistan. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back. We're going to continue our conversation on Afghanistan, and joining me now is Dr. Nipa Banerjee, Senior Fellow with the School of International Development and Center for International Policy Studies at the University of Ottawa, and also she was the resident head of Canada's aid program in Kabul, Afghanistan from 2003 and 2006. Dr. Banerjee, thank you so much for joining me today for this important discussion.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Now, you lived and worked in Afghanistan at a very critical time. This was just after, the infamous events of 9/11, so 2003, 2006. Can you tell us how you saw the country change in that period?
Well, when we first went there, our embassy was established in 2003, and that's when I went there. And we had a very small embassy with only one administrative staff, myself as the head of aid, a political affairs officer, and our ambassador. But the work was huge because we had to start programming, establishing our contacts, and learn ourselves because we have never been in Afghanistan before. That was the first time that we had a representative office. So it was a lot of work, but it was a wonderful time for Afghanistan and thus for the international community because things were blossoming. Things were going extremely well. And, as far as development program is concerned, the Afghan government was extremely cooperative. A lot of the NGOs and international organizations were working and things were going very well. I didn't see any changes occurring in that period, 2003 to 6, but it started deteriorating. After that time, I was still visiting Afghanistan twice a year, and I saw this deterioration and decline throughout the time, starting from about 2007-8 until now.
So even prior to Canada's withdrawal of its forces in Afghanistan, you saw deterioration already start?
Yes, I would say that I did see the deterioration start. One of the main things we aimed at was to strengthen the government, build the government institutions, and get them to get the legitimacy by earning the support of the local people.
Right.
And that was gradually deteriorating because programs were not successful and there were problems on issues with the Afghanistan government as well.
Wow. So when we see the footage coming out of Afghanistan right now, where we see the Taliban have taken control, many of us on the other side of the world think, okay, everything was, peaceful and rosy up until, a few weeks ago, and then now things have reduced to chaos. But you're suggesting that things were already kind of deteriorating. So let's dial it back for a moment. How was the Taliban perceived when you went there first in 2003 to set up with the embassy?
Actually, the Taliban was not seen at all or heard of in the beginning, up to say about 2005-6, really, you wouldn't hear about the Taliban. They had been defeated and they fled across the Tora Bora Mountains and never to be seen here.
Right.
And that's the way we thought it would be, that Taliban will never return. But what our problem, as well as the Afghan government's problem, was that we did it wrong. I mean, we did not foresee the future properly. The Taliban insurgency had already started, and they were getting stronger and stronger, and that was ignored and neglected.
My goodness.
And therefore, when you say that, it only started a few weeks ago, that's not true. In fact, we came to know, maybe not immediately after 2006-07, but gradually it was deteriorating. But I would say over the last 15 years, it was quite a matter of concern that things were not going well and things were deteriorating.
Well, like I said, I feel like that we see a completely different picture when we look at the media, or when we look at reports rather coming from Afghanistan nowadays. So this is very interesting, because you obviously, your firsthand account, you were there, you worked, and you saw what happened in your subsequent visits twice annually. So I do want to continue this discussion when we return from these commercial breaks. Please stick around.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Nipa Banerjee. Dr. Banerjee, again, you spent many years in Afghanistan. You still visit a few times every year. You're still in touch with many associates on the ground from your time there, local Afghans. How are they feeling these days since the withdrawal of the American troops?
Of course, I would say they were very concerned when this happened. But, I wouldn't think that they are more or less in the same wavelength as me, that they knew that things were not going that well, and probably an Taliban insurgency would impact on the government. But after it happened, they're still concerned. However, they think that things are not really as bad as it was expected if the Taliban took over. And, I talk to them every day on a daily basis. And what they are saying is that people are concerned, and so they don't go out that much, but they do go out for grocery shopping. For instance, this one gentleman, I mean, these are young Afghans with whom I worked.
Right.
And, he said that he was not going out because he worked with the government, and people said that the Taliban was going to harm those who work for the government. So they didn't go out, but his mother and wife went out, and nobody stopped them. They got their groceries and came back. Another guy I was speaking to, as I was speaking on WhatsApp, I could hear a dog barking. And Afghans are unlikely to take dogs as pets. So, I asked him, in a humorous way, do you have a pet? And then he said, no, my children are playing in the street. I'm just watching over them from inside the house. I'm near the window, and they're playing with a dog. And the dog is sort of wagging the tail and playing with them.
And this is in downtown Kabul.
This is in downtown Kabul. And I was... I said, well, it looks very, very normal. And he said that it is normal. It doesn't look very much, maybe less number of cars.
Right.
But, people are walking, the stores are now opening gradually, and they don't have that much problem.
Because we hear concerns about how women and the girls will be treated, because previously under Taliban rule, there were very huge human rights violations. Do you have concerns for the women and girls in Afghanistan and Kabul?
I do have concerns in Kabul or in Afghanistan. Now, if you say in Kabul, the urbanite women who are educated, they are concerned about their rights, etc. But I'll tell you that in the villages, the women are talking about getting peace rather than, their rights, because they are so concerned about the fightings that are going on, about the civilian deaths, etc., that they are not concerned about. They say that, our rights are not more important than getting our children, on what is required for the children and our families and parents, etc. So, the women will have some issues. Yes, I wouldn't say that they wouldn't have any. But then, you've got to deal with it. I would say, what I'm looking at it is to get the best out of a very bad situation. That, if the international community sort of gets a little bit, they talk to the Taliban, things will get better. They are saying they have changed. I see that, they dispersed the women's protest march in Kabul. And, but, none of the women were killed. There was a little bit of an assault. Somebody, even a woman, I couldn't believe that could happen in Kabul, even during my very early days when things were going better. This woman snatched a megaphone away from a Taliban. And that requires a lot of courage, yes, but nothing happened after that. The woman wasn't beaten up or anything. So I would say it is, and, when I was talking to one of these young men I talked to, and, he said that, well, if they march like that to Ashraf Ghani's office, they would be dispersed as well.
Okay, well, unfortunately, Dr. Banerjee, we're out of time, but we have to have you back on again. Thank you so much for this update.
Thank you very much for having me. And elaboration would be better. Thank you.